For the third time this month, a guy dressed up like a cop, fake badge, fake attitude, the whole 9 yards, was climbing over my backyard fence again. But this time my grandfather wasn't out planting flowers. He was wiring up something electrical, humming like a man who'd just remembered his favorite old joke. The HOA thought they were clever, hiring someone to play law enforcement to legitimize their little theft scheme. Big mistake. You could feel the tension in the air that night. Grandpa just sat on the porch tapping his teacup like it was Morse code eyes fixed on the gate. The minute that phony cop touched the latch, blue sparks leapt out like some angry dragon spitting lightning, and the whole neighborhood heard him scream. The cameras caught every second, but that was just my grandfather's opening move. Let me back up a sec. My grandfather, William Chin, 78, was a retired building inspector who'd lived on that lakeside property for 40 years. Most folks his age complain about back pain when they garden. Grandpa hummed old Cold War folk songs, talked to his shovel like it was a war buddy, and never seemed to tire. Developers had been drooling over his 2 acres ever since the lake got trendy, but they didn't know he'd survive predators worse than them. Trouble started 6 months back when Karen Henderson took over as HOA president, the kind of lady who measured grass height with a ruler and sent violation notices for Christmas lights left up past January 2nd. But this time her harassment went beyond the usual. She sent us letters that looked official, citing rules that didn't exist. Then came the break-ins guys in cop costumes with dollar store radios and Nike sneakers. Real cops, not a chance. Trust but verify, Grandpa muttered, installing the third hidden camera near his old bookshed. He was way too savvy for a normal retiree. Most folks his age can't even unlock a smartphone. But here he was, setting up motion sensors like it was second nature. When I asked where he'd learned this stuff, he'd just wink. Building inspection teaches you to see what others miss. He covered his bases, no trespassing signs every 50 feet, warning about electric fences, low voltage for the goats, all perfectly legal. But the fence wasn't just for show. We found fresh boot prints near the shed. Someone was studying him, learning his habits, mapping his property. They wanted his inspection records, but I didn't get why old permits were worth all this trouble. Grandpa, though, studied those prints like they were top-secret files. Old dogs with long tails, he chuckled, eyes glinting. Karen's about to learn why. The way he analyzed every intrusion, every footprint, made me realize Grandpa had skills that went way beyond building inspection. That night, after we finished wiring up the last of the system, I finally saw his mask slip. "This isn't just real estate to me," he said, voice low, watching the lake shimmer in the dark. "It's the last place I have of your grandmother. If I lose this, I lose her too." It was vulnerability, but it was also part of his strategy. Later, I'd see he showed me weakness as bait. The alarm tripped at 11:47 p.m., red LEDs glowing in Grandpa's bedroom. He didn't call the police. He just slipped outside, took his old night vision scope, and waited absolutely still like he'd done this before. The trespasser crept up in full costume, same as before. But this time, as soon as he touched the gate, 12 volts shot through him, enough to make him dance back, land in the bird bath, and holler loud enough to wake half the lake. But Grandpa wasn't done. Hidden sprinklers sprayed a marking compound totally invisible, but under UV light it would glow for weeks, sticking to clothes and skin. Anyone checking for the culprit would see a neon sign. While the guy was still staggering, Grandpa whispered, "He's ex-military. Probably a contractor." I just stared at him, realizing my grandpa wasn't just some old man with a shovel. Real cops would have called for backup. This guy tried to disappear, leaving behind torn fabric and a high-end lock-picking device. The tire tracks out front. Not a cruiser, a luxury sedan. "They're after my old records," Grandpa explained, "from the Sunset Hills project. Someone powerful wants them gone." Next morning, Janet Morrison, the HOA treasurer, showed up, pale hands shaking, clutching a manila envelope. "I printed these from Karen's email," she whispered. Turns out Karen was working with a development company to force Grandpa out. Emails discussed pressure tactics, even cleaning up loose ends. This wasn't some HOA spat. It was an orchestrated hit on Grandpa's property. Janet, quiet as she was, had been keeping 2 sets of books for years, tracking Karen's embezzlement and side deals. Development Solutions offered me a partnership if I helped them get these properties, she confessed, producing more emails. Karen wasn't just president, she'd changed her name after losing her real estate license in a fraud scandal. And guess who'd blown the whistle, Grandpa? She'd spent 15 years planning her revenge, weaponizing HOA power to do it. The emergency meeting she called for Saturday, supposedly about Grandpa's dangerous security measures, but really she'd invited local news, set up fake witness statements, and even brought in experts to make Grandpa look unstable. Grandpa was ready. He had Janet request a venue change to city council chambers where the rules and scrutiny were real. He made more phone calls using phrases like operational parameters and evidence coordination. By now, Janet was pouring coffee with trembling hands, but talking with the determination of someone who'd finally hit her limit. She'd been secretly recording HOA meetings for months. She showed us everything: financial fraud, intimidation, bribery. Karen was up to her neck. The day of reckoning arrived. Karen rolled up in a black Mercedes flanked by two goons who looked more like bouncers than officials. She marched up waving a court order declaring they were there to inspect Grandpa's property for dangerous electrical installations. Grandpa just smiled, invited them inside, and poured tea. Karen tried to bully her way through with threats and rehearsed lines, but Grandpa calmly addressed her as Miss Miller, letting her know he'd uncovered her past. Her henchmen started shifting uneasily when Grandpa pulled out files detailing her fraud. "How exactly did you convince these men they had legal authority?" he asked. The bigger guy admitted, "She told us you attacked a cop. We're just private security." Grandpa picked up the phone to call the police. Karen panicked, pivoted to smear tactics. "The whole community knows what you did." People are scared. But Grandpa was unfazed. "Fear's a powerful tool, Karen, but it only works if people don't see who's holding the leash." He described classic psychological warfare from Soviet manuals, at which point her cronies started looking for the exits. When Karen threatened connections at the state level, Grandpa simply revealed he'd been recording their conversation, and outside cruisers were already rolling up. With Karen and her fake cops in cuffs, the federal investigation kicked off Janet's records, Grandpa's footage, and the treasure trove of evidence she'd gathered. Over the next week, a small army gathered at Grandpa's house. Detective Miller, who'd known Grandpa from a decades-old drug bust, Rebecca Foster, a sharp-eyed federal prosecutor, and Jake Wilson, an investigative reporter Grandpa had mentored years back. Piece by piece, they put together a puzzle showing Development Solutions as a multi-state crime operation targeting elderly homeowners, using HOA boards as cover, laundering money, bribing officials, even possibly linked to mysterious accidents when owners didn't cooperate. The night of the city council hearing was something else. Karen showed up with lawyers, PR experts, and a full multimedia presentation meant to paint Grandpa as a menace. She played edited clips, rolled out expert testimony from people who'd never met Grandpa, and neighbors who repeated lines that sounded rehearsed. But when it was Grandpa's turn, he stood up, old stoic, full of quiet command. "Miss Henderson," he began, then louder, or should I say Karen Miller, care to explain the Sunset Hills fraud? You could see her composure crack, attorneys whispering, the whole crowd realizing this was more than a squabble over fences. Grandpa took her own projector, played unedited footage, break-ins, fake cops, the whole mess. Then he pulled out a UV light, scanned the audience. One of Karen's lawyers glowed bright as a traffic cone, busted as the trespasser from before. Rebecca Foster stood up, flashed her federal badge, and dropped the bomb. "This is evidence in a federal racketeering case." FBI agents moved in, handcuffs snapped, and the room exploded in gasps and murmurs. Karen shouted about her connections, about lawyers and judges on her payroll, but it was over. Development Solutions collapsed in days, millions in assets seized, dozens indicted. Janet became HOA president. Neighbors who'd once sided with Karen now barbecued in Grandpa's honor. But the real twist came after all the dust settled, when I finally asked Grandpa who he really was. He handed me a photo, him in a suit, shaking hands with President Reagan. "William Chen," he said, 31 years CIA, domestic counterintelligence. The building inspector gig was my cover. The whole saga, the traps, the strategy, even Karen's downfall was just another mission. So what now? Grandpa grows flowers. No electricity required. At least not for now. The only thing he's electrifying these days is the community spirit. But as he said, you never know when you'll have to outsmart another Karen. Ever felt powerless up against someone with more money or connections who thinks they can just bully their way through life? This story proves it's not about brute force, it's about knowing the game, documenting everything, and never underestimating an old dog with a few tricks left. What would you do if your home was on the line? Drop your thoughts below, and if stories like this get your blood pumping, go ahead and tell us where you're watching from, because justice in the end is something we all have to fight for.